I have every right to relax in the living room of this house. The kitchen should be enough for you. You should be grateful you're even allowed to live here. Sarah, my mother-in-law, lounged comfortably on the couch, fiddling with the remote. The sight of her silhouette stirred a painful knot in my chest, accompanied by a burning sensation behind my eyes. But I knew I couldn't afford to shed a tear. The fear of showing weakness in front of my mother-in-law kept me silent. Her belongings gradually took over the newly built living room. Makeup, clothes, stacks of magazines, all piling up as though she was erasing my presence bit by bit. 3 months ago, Sarah had shown up under the guise of celebrating our new home. But since then, she'd never left. These dishes are arranged so poorly. The house I grew up in was polished daily by our maid. But I suppose he wouldn't understand, given your upbringing. Sarah let out a mocking chuckle. I could only nod in silence.
Mom, I think it's time to head to bed.
My husband had just returned from work, sitting down beside Sarah. Sarah's expression softened instantly as she gently stroked his hair, like he was still a little boy. There you are, my sweet little boy. I forced myself to stifle the pang in my heart. It had been 2 years since our wedding. What was supposed to be a living room filled with memories was now a place where I didn't belong. Standing is part of a housewife's life. If you have time to sit, you should be scrubbing the floor. Or maybe your family just didn't teach you right. Sarah's words struck harshly, making me instinctively shrink back. Chris sat beside her, silently absorbed in his phone. I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I wasn't trying hard enough. Perhaps if I'd been a better wife, if I'd woken up earlier to clean, things might have been different. Every day I balanced a demanding corporate project while trying to keep the household in perfect order. But no matter how much I tried, nothing seemed to satisfy Sarah. Upbringing really does matter, doesn't it? I never thought my son would marry someone with such background. I looked out the kitchen window at the evening sky, feeling a familiar sting in my throat, fighting back the rush of emotions. Just then, my phone vibrated with an unexpected message. I glanced at the sender's name, surprised, and quickly opened it to read. My name is Emily Jones. I grew up as the eldest child with a younger brother and sister. My parents placed a lot of expectations on me, and I worked hard to meet them. From a young age, I was the one people relied on. Emily can do it. Leave it to Emily. She's got this. That was the kind of trust and responsibility placed on me in every area of my life. I became accustomed to handling most things on my own. A bit of a perfectionist by nature, I found that with a little hard work and attention to detail, I could usually solve any problem that came my way. In my 29 years, I had hardly known failure. Now I work in a prominent advertising agency. This was a company I had admired since my college days. I threw myself into job applications, internships, and early recruiting programs, determined to make it here. I soon earned an early job offer. Throughout college, I worked various part-time jobs and joined a few clubs, always taking on leadership roles. At one of my jobs, I became a shift leader, often guiding newer employees. I found fulfillment in being someone others could rely on. In a campus organization, I served as the team leader, coordinating activities that others said would be impossible to manage without a hitch. Over time, I learned how to present myself well, projecting a balance of modesty and confidence. By my first year at the company, I had developed a reputation for being reliable and efficient. My managers praised my work, which reinforced my sense of pride in my abilities. Before long, I was trusted with handling high-profile clients, including some of the top brands in our industry. Within a year, I was chosen as the leader for a major project. I was proud of who I was. I believed that if I worked hard and approached things sincerely, success would naturally follow. As I achieved more, I also felt a stronger sense of responsibility. I began to fear letting anyone down, and I set increasingly higher expectations for myself. The pressure to meet these expectations became a part of me, sometimes even at the cost of my own well-being. Deep down, I sometimes wished I could lean on someone else, but I didn't know how. There was a sense of loneliness that I carried with me. That's when I met Matt. Matt could see through my efforts to always appear strong, sensing when I was pushing myself too hard. He would offer words that lightened my load, showing me that it was okay to lean on someone. For the first time, I had someone who accepted my vulnerabilities. I began to open up to him, trusting that he could understand me. He valued my ambition while also gently reminding me to be kind to myself. Being with him was a new experience. Having someone who understood and supported me so deeply was unlike anything I'd known. Naturally, I grew fond of him. Over time, I started a relationship with Matt. He was my rock, always there with thoughtful words or a gesture that put me at ease. I felt understood and cared for, maybe for the first time in my life. Matt's father, James, is a respected marketing executive at one of our largest client companies. He's well known for his dedication and integrity, and I had crossed paths with him on many projects. Over time, I'd come to admire James's professional manner. Despite holding a high position, he was always approachable, treating even the most junior employees with kindness and respect. I'd often see him handle mistakes with empathy, even if the error wasn't his own. His humility and professionalism were qualities I deeply respected, and I aspired to emulate him. Given our work relationship, James was hands-off regarding our personal lives, never involving himself in my and Matt's relationship. However, Matt's mother, Sarah, was another story entirely. She was absent from our wedding and rarely asked about our lives, seemingly uninterested in forming any bond. According to Matt, his parents had been separated for some time. He explained that his mother's difficult personality has strained the family dynamic. I didn't think much of it at the time, figuring everyone had their family quirks. After our wedding, Matt and I rented an apartment, but soon we decided it was time to find a home where we could start a family. We envisioned a new house, imagining a spacious kitchen, open floor plan, and a home office for each of us. I worked hard, often dreaming of a life filled with quiet mornings and cozy evenings in our dream home. We pooled our savings and added some help from my parents to make the down payment on a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Our new place was perfect for the life we envisioned, with ample space for 2 children and rooms that could easily convert into nurseries or play areas. The house felt like it was ours. We even planned every detail down to the soundlight in the living room and a kitchen where we'd prepare meals together. I dreamed of our future family growing up in that house, and it felt worth every bit of effort we had put in. After we closed on the home, we entered the whirlwind of decorating and planning. Then, out of nowhere, Sarah began visiting frequently. At first, it seemed innocent. She would stop by with a few bags and insist she was just helping out. But soon, her presence became overwhelming. She would sit on the couch, commenting on how everything should be organized. Every visit became longer and longer. Matt's mother went from stopping by to practically moving in. She brought in bags of clothes, toiletries, and personal items. Our peaceful new home suddenly felt crowded and no longer ours.
The kitchen should be arranged like this. When I grew up, we had housekeepers to keep everything spotless.
I swallowed my frustration, nodding along, not wanting to create any tension.
Hey, Mom, ready to call it a night?
As soon as Matt returned from work, Sarah's demeanor softened. She would smile, ruffle his hair, and treat him like he was a small child.
You'll always be my little boy?
Watching her dote on Matt felt like a punch to the gut. This was our home, and yet I felt like an outsider.
You know, housework is just a given for a wife. If you have time to sit, you certainly have time to clean.
I stiffened, her words stinging. Next to us, Matt continued scrolling on his phone, saying nothing. I began questioning myself. Was I doing enough? Maybe if I were a better wife, things would improve. Every morning I woke up earlier, did more, tried harder. I poured myself into both my job and my home, hoping that someday my efforts would be enough. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough for her. Every evening, Sarah's comments about my upbringing or her disdain for my homemaking skills echoed in my mind. One night, as I was finishing up dinner, a message popped up on my phone from an unexpected contact. I glanced at the name on the message, feeling a pang of surprise. The message was from my former mentor, Rachel, who had helped guide me early in my career. She was someone I respected deeply, and her reaching out felt like a lifeline in the midst of my chaotic life. Hey Emily, just thought of you today. How have you been? Seeing her message, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if she had reached through the screen to pull me out of my fog. I realized then that I hadn't spoken to anyone outside of Matt and his family for quite some time. Hi, Rachel. It's so good to hear from you. We chatted briefly, but she could sense something was wrong. You know, you can talk to me about anything, right? Her words lingered, and for the first time I felt an urge to open up. I don't want to burden you, but things at home have been challenging. She listened patiently as I poured out everything about my living situation, the constant intrusion, and my feeling of being edged out of my own life. Oh, that sounds really tough, Emily. You're not alone, though. Talking to her felt like shedding a weight I've been carrying for months. Remember, you're strong, and you don't have to accept disrespect in your own home. Her words echoed in my mind long after we ended our conversation. For the first time, I felt validated in my feelings. That night, I lay awake, Rachel's words repeating in my mind. You're strong. You don't have to accept disrespect in your own home. The following morning, I woke up with a new sense of resolve. I had tried to make this arrangement work, but if Matt wasn't willing to support me, I knew I needed to stand up for myself. That day, Sarah made her usual rounds of complaints, dismissing my cooking and criticizing the way I cleaned.
Honestly, how can anyone live like this?
This time, instead of quietly nodding along, I stood my ground. I think it's time we set some boundaries. She looked at me, taken aback by my sudden firmness. I've let you take over my home, and I've done everything I can to make things comfortable for you, but I need my own space and respect too. She scoffed, clearly not expecting any resistance.
You need to be grateful you're even allowed to live here.
Her words didn't sting the way they once had. I remembered Rachel's encouragement and held my ground. I do my best, and I deserve to feel like this is my home too. She looked at me with narrowed eyes. For the first time, I sensed her control slipping.
You should speak with Matt about this.
She turned and walked away, her words leaving a sour taste in my mouth. That evening, I told Matt everything. I love you, but I can't continue like this. He listened, looking conflicted, but he finally agreed that we would talk with his mother. The next morning, Sarah packed her things and left, clearly displeased. For the first time in months, our home was quiet, and the weight lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't the final step, but it was a start. Slowly, we rebuilt our space, and I began to feel at peace once again. Rachel's words, my newfound boundaries, and a sense of control restored my life bit by bit. I'd taken back what was mine and realized I was stronger than I'd ever known. Weeks went by in quiet relief, with the home feeling like ours again. Sarah stayed away and Matt seemed more attentive, though at times a touch of guilt lingered on his face. I focused on my career, putting energy back into the projects I loved. Rachel and I kept in touch, and I found myself confiding in her regularly, feeling strengthened by her unwavering support. Then one afternoon, Sarah called.
I'm coming over.
Her tone was curt, almost dismissive. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. When she arrived, she barely looked at me as she entered.
Matt, you need to come outside.
She pulled him aside, and they talked in hushed voices on the porch. Though I couldn't hear everything, her gestures and his furrowed brow told me enough. When Matt came back in, he looked conflicted.
She's struggling, Sarah.
He ran a hand through his hair, seeming to weigh his words.
She says she doesn't know where else to go.
The exhaustion in his voice was clear, and I felt a pang of sympathy. But my boundaries were important too. I know she's going through a hard time, but I need to feel safe and respected in my own home. We talked for a long time that night, finally coming to an agreement. Sarah could come over on weekends, but only as a guest and for short visits. Matt nodded, understanding my need for space, and I felt a weight lift. The arrangement wasn't perfect, but it was a compromise. I focused on rebuilding my own identity, knowing my boundaries would be tested again, but feeling equipped to handle it. Rachel continued to check in, and her support became a source of strength I hadn't realized I needed. The months that followed were a delicate balance of family, work, and my newfound confidence. One weekend, Sarah came over and, for the first time, offered to help with the dishes after dinner. It was a small gesture, but one that I appreciated.
I can see you've made this place nice, Emily.
Her words were hesitant but sincere, and I felt a glimmer of understanding between us. As the months passed, I settled into my own rhythm. I focused on my work, strengthening my friendships, and made time for myself in ways I hadn't before. I looked back on everything I had endured and realized that setting boundaries didn't mean pushing people away. It meant making space for myself in the life I wanted. Sarah's visits became more cordial, and she seemed to understand the limits I had set, perhaps realizing that our relationship was stronger with them than without. Rachel and I continued our friendship, and I knew that, should another challenge come, I had a support system I could rely on. And as for Matt, he showed a new respect for me, one that was born from seeing my strength, not just as his partner, but as an individual with her own needs and limits. Looking around our home one quiet evening, I felt a deep sense of peace. The struggle to reclaim my space had been difficult, but it had been worth it. I knew now that I could stand up for myself, even in the face of family dynamics and challenging relationships. It wasn't about creating conflict, but about valuing myself enough to ask for what I deserved. And that realization was one I would carry with me, knowing that no matter what came next, I had the strength to face it. My story wasn't one of perfect resolution, but it was one of resilience. And in the quiet moments, when I'd sit with a cup of tea, I'd remember Rachel's words, feeling grateful for every step I'd taken to create a life that truly felt like mine. The journey wasn't over, but I had come far. I was finally home. The weeks continued with a quiet harmony in the house that felt refreshing, almost new. I spent more time diving into work projects, rebuilding confidence and trust in my abilities. Rachel remained a constant presence, always reminding me of my worth and that setting boundaries was an act of self-respect, not defiance. Sarah's visits gradually became less frequent, each one respectful of the boundaries we had discussed. I began feeling an unexpected sense of calm whenever she was around, as if we'd found a mutual understanding that once seemed impossible. One weekend, she came over with a surprise, bringing a pie she'd baked.
I thought this might be a nice gesture, you know? Something to share together.
Her voice held a softness I hadn't heard in a long time, and we shared a small, genuine moment of appreciation for each other's efforts. As our new routine settled, I felt more secure in my relationships, knowing that the boundaries I had set allowed room for everyone to be their best selves, including me. Over time, Matt and I grew closer, finding a balance between family, personal boundaries, and shared dreams. Life felt fuller, steadier, and more grounded. I learned that peace in relationships doesn't always come from total agreement, but often from respectful space. It wasn't just a happier ending, it was a new beginning, one rooted in self-awareness, resilience, and the courage to ask for what I needed. Looking around at the home we'd built together, I knew I'd fought for this peace, and it was mine. And as I embraced this fresh start, I knew it was only the beginning of a life where I could live fully, authentically, and with the respect I deserved. From that point on, I would face each day with the strength I'd gained, knowing that life would present challenges, but I'd overcome them with resilience and grace. I was proud of the woman I'd become, and I looked forward to the journey ahead. And in those quiet moments of reflection, with Rachel's wisdom in my heart and my confidence restored, I understood that this was the life I'd always wanted. For the first time, I was living for myself, and it felt liberating.